All right. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Alicia Funk.
Thank you. Thanks for putting this together. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, we appreciate you joining us. Now, we're going to try to figure out how we're going to watch this little video because Alicia has a very nice video, but we're a little worried about technically how we're going to do it. We have a plan, Cameron?
Yeah, so hopefully it goes all right. So we'll just share it right now.
My name's Alicia Funk, and my family is on a journey to live as sustainably and healthy as possible. We grow a garden and live off the grid, but really wanted to challenge ourselves to go to the next level. We've been working to gather, grow, and eat daily the wild plants that are native to the place we live. We don't have to go to the rainforest to find an abundance of food and medicine or an exotic healthy food. It's right here, under our feet and above our heads. In the last century, we've switched from eating an abundance of local plant varieties to only consuming a narrow range of high-yield species. Many of these foods lack the taste and nutritional content of what we enjoyed 100 years ago, and they require significant water, fertilizers, and processing. Food localization means cultivating a sense of place, a deep awareness of the land we call home. It's a process that depends upon the continuing exchange of new ideas between local communities of farmers, scientists, indigenous knowledge keepers, schools, foodies, chefs, and environmentalists.
So there's a lot of plants growing here that have just incredible uses. When we talk about eating local, we forget that there are foods that have been growing here long before anybody had a garden.
The first step towards food localization is simply being willing to take a few minutes away from an electronic screen and wander outside. I focus on getting to know one or two new plants each season and trying as many different ways as possible to use them in our daily diet. Does anyone know what this plant is? What?
Fur tips.
Yes, you're right. These are fir tips. So we gathered them in the spring, and so that makes them bright green on the ends. You notice the ends are bright green? So, okay, who's ready? You're ready? Okay, you are brave.
I know.
You're the first one. Nice. Your little sip. And this one should taste like lemonade.
Does that one taste more like lemonade too?
What do you think it tastes like? Is it sweet or sour or?
Sweet.
Yes.
Oh, it tastes like it.
I've been switching out the landscaping around our home to beautiful native plants that help the habitat while providing our family with easy to gather, healthy food and medicine.
Many of these plants were cultivated by Indian tribes, and some of them have medicinal properties, some of them have edible properties like the elderberry, and some of the plants you see here. Because of that ability to use our heritage, when we bring it forward into urban gardening, we connect ourselves to the whole history of California, to our natural resources, to the beauty of our state, and to our ability to help make the planet a better place in the future.
We talk about a lot of this stuff, point out, oh, we get to use that plant and make this out of it, or, you can take this and do this, but knowing or seeing the final product of all the gathering and work, seeing what the reward can be and how tasty it is.
What I call living wild means remembering how to truly live sustainably within the landscape we inhabit.
That's a very classy video you've got there. You put some work into it, I can tell.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a while since I made the video. As you can tell by there's some new wrinkles on my face since then. And my son, who's 4 in the video, is and identified the tips. He's now a teenager. So it's been a few years. But yeah, I'm excited to share with everybody, some information today.
Okay, before we get into that, just tell us, introduce yourself a little, your relationship to Nevada County, how long you've been here, how you came to be involved in this stuff.
Yeah, I've been here in Nevada County for 20 years, and I had a history doing research on medicinal plants and gathering up the clinical studies and publishing books for more the conventional medical community, so doctors and pharmacists, about how to safely and effectively use plants for medicine. So basically most of that had happened already. And then when I moved to the area a couple decades ago, I realized that a lot of the plants that are native here are also the ones that have the research on them scientifically. So that's how it all began. I was really curious, and I just started spending more and more time getting to know the plants, learning to identify them in the field, and it kind of all started from there.
Okay, and you've published one book?
Well, the Living Wild book is the book that's focused on using the native plants here for food and medicine. And we're on the third edition. We had the first edition was in 2010, and that was just focused on the Sierra Nevada region. And then the other two editions have been all of California. So native plants to all of California.
Okay, great. Well,
Yeah.
Just a reminder, everybody, ask your questions for Alicia in the chat, and I will ask them of her. So feel free to type whatever questions you have. And Alicia, you have a kind of presentation or some things you want to talk about?
Sure, yeah, I'd love to introduce you to some plants today. And I wish I could do this with everybody out in the field. It would be a lot more fun if we were all taking a walk together, but I'll do the best I can to introduce you to some of my favorite plants. So as you saw in the video, there's been a lack of, a loss of plant diversity. So we've had this changing climate. We've had a 75% loss in food diversity over the last century. We've had the introduction of more patented GMO crops into our food supply. There's been a decline in the cultural knowledge of the food uses of native plants, and that's put us in a nutritionally vulnerable position. So 95% of what we're eating today comes from only 30 crops. So really there's a lot of rediscovering that I think needs to happen. So food localization that I was mentioning in the video, to me is also, of course, enjoying our locally grown farm fresh foods, but also enjoying local native plant foods that are adapted specifically to thrive in our local ecosystem. So oftentimes we walk into a grocery store and we don't have enough fear about eating processed foods that are in packages on the shelves of a grocery store. But we're afraid to eat something growing around us that has a history of use for thousands of years as a healthy food. So I've been eating wild foods regularly. I've been feeding them to students that have taken my classes. I've been feeding them to friends and family, and we are all still alive and well. So I want to give you that confidence that if you can learn to identify some of these plants correctly, start planting them in your garden, around your house, that you can really enjoy these as a wonderful addition to relying on local foods. So after the conversation, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to learn to identify some of the common native plants that grow around us here locally. You'll be excited about planting some of them in your backyard, and really starting to rely on them as a source of nutritious health. And then just tuning into the local landscape. So with this whole pandemic, we've all spent way too much time staring at screens. It was already a problem before the pandemic, and now it's a year later, we've zoomed ourselves out. So I know we're on Zoom again, but as soon as possible, I just want to encourage everybody to get off Zoom, get away from your computer, and start spending time outdoors. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of my favorite plants around the year. So each season, so it's the first step really is to paying attention to what season we're in and what plants are doing around you in that season. So I'm going to start with summer and Manzanita Blossoms. So here, if anyone is not familiar with Manzanita, so for a lot of people, they don't like Manzanita because of the fire risk that it poses. And I just want to challenge you to really realize that there are important things that Manzanita does, both for the ecosystem as far as providing a nursery habitat for evergreens and conifers, but also as an important food use. So in the summer, there are, well, let's see, I'm going to start actually just showing you the blossoms, because this is what's on the Manzanita bush right now. So are these blossoms, and you can gather up the blossoms and just add them to salads. So it's really amazing. They taste, whether they're white or pink, I'm not sure if you can see them closely, but if it's white or pink, it doesn't really matter, either color, and you can just eat them. And if you see an ant on them, it's actually a good sign, because that ants are going to the sweetest blossoms, and you just kind of gently shake off the ants, unless you want extra protein, of course. And then you just try the blossoms. I have a recipe for making jam out of the blossoms in my book. And also, but just eating them raw on salads is also really fun to do. So other things about the Manzanita. So in the summer are the berries. So I gather them in the summer when they're ripe, and then I store them. So they're dry on the bush. So you don't ever have to really dry them. And again, I don't think you can really see this very well, but inside the Manzanita berry, if you crush it, and every kid who's grown up close to the woods here knows this, but if you crush up the berry, it has a sweet powder inside it. And that Manzanita powder is what was used in making a traditional drink into a cider. So you crush up the berries and you pour water over it and let steep. It's not hot water, it's just kind of room temperature water. Let it steep overnight and then strain it, and you can enjoy it the next day. So you take the berries, and like I said, I also like to make this into I separate the seeds and skin and away from the big seed in there. So the only reason we're not all running around eating Manzanita berries is it does have a big seed in the center. So my favorite way to do that is, sorry, I'm getting a weird picture. There we go. I just take these and I put them in a blender. I put the blender on low, and then I put it through a strainer, and all the sugar comes out into a bowl. And then you can keep that on your spice shelf. You can keep that in your freezer. You can add it into recipes. I have a recipe for Manzanita Crackers made out of that flour. We make granola with that. It's just a delicious, sweet powder. And if you're wondering why you would bother doing that, and you're focused on nutrition, I did have some of our native foods tested at an independent laboratory, and with pomegranates, there's this thing called an ORAC value, and that's basically your antioxidant content. And so pomegranates have an ORAC value of about 4,500, and blueberries are about close to 5,000. Manzanita berries have 15,000 is their ORAC value. So there's a huge antioxidant potential here that is literally all over our backyards that, a lot of us don't realize is there, and it's delicious. So I make up the cider in the summertime, and I just have a big jug of it in our refrigerator, and my whole family drinks it all summer. So really encourage you to get to know the Manzanita berries this summer, and right now to get to know the blossoms.
Alicia, everybody wants to know what it tastes like.
It's sweet. It's like the sweetest sugar. It's a fruit sugar, but It's very sweet. Excuse me.
I've eaten a lot of Manzanita berries. You know, I grew up on the ridge with Star, and we were all naked, and all we did was eat Manzanita berries,
Yeah.
and all sorts of other madrone berries, and those little yam things that you dig up, those little yellow flowers. Oh, you're gonna get
Yeah,
them
the
out.
star tulips. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely something that's fun to do, and they're very sweet. So it's like a sweet, tangy taste. And manzanita means little apple in Spanish. And basically that's the fruit looks like a little apple. And the taste of the cider is really similar to an unfiltered apple juice. So if you like unfiltered apple juice, if you like the wonderful apple juice, but one that's very, very high in antioxidants, then I'd recommend trying it this summer.
How about
So I wanna-
how
I'm
about
sorry.
vitamin C? Does it have much vitamin C?
I don't know about the vitamin C content. I don't think that's not the primary content. When I go into the fir tips, that's where you're going to get your vitamin C. But manzanita, it's more of the overall antioxidant value. I did want to mention one other thing about antioxidants, and that's just that I'm not going to go into them in detail, but we do have another native plant that you may have already heard of, which is elderberry. And I'm not sure if you can really see these well, but those are elderberries I gathered from some trees around our house. And elderberries, as far as that ORAC value, those are about 15,000 as well. So they're also very high in antioxidants. And I just dry them, and it's just kind of like something chewy to munch on. That's really, really delicious. So I always have a jar of these handy. And then madrone berries, which I'm not going to go into in detail here, those have about 13,000 ORAC value. So our native fruits are very, very healthy and something important to remember. So going back to manzanita, I did want to mention, if anyone has ever had poison oak, which I don't think you can live in our area without having had poison oak before, but the manzanita leaves are the best remedy for poison oak. So I used to make this and had it at Briar Patch and everything, but it's really simple to make on your own. You just take a mason jar and you shove a bunch of manzanita leaves into the jar. You pour hot water over the leaves. So say, fill this up with manzanita leaves. Let it steep overnight, and then you want to put it into a spray bottle. And then I keep it for the whole summer. And anytime you start to get the red bumps on your skin, when you first start to see it break out, or you're starting to itch and you've taken a walk in the woods and you probably were exposed to poison oak, just spray that on and it works right away. It's very astringent, so it just dries up the poison oak oils immediately. So it's very, very important remedy to have around for the summers up here with poison oak. So going on to fall, so oak nuts, which we all know as acorns. Again, I'm going to try to show you my a little acorn basket here. So most of these are black oaks. These big, giant, large ones are the black oaks. And then I do have a few small ones, which are from blue oaks. So if you're wondering, I don't know what kind of oak tree I have in my yard, or are oak nuts edible? The answer is that they're all edible from every species of oak tree. So even if you don't know what species you have, they are edible. The thing to know is, well, how do you prepare them? Unless you're a squirrel, you really can't eat them, just plain. So the key is to gather them in the fall. So again, once again, you're paying attention to the seasons. Hopefully you walk outside and you notice there's a bunch of acorns on the ground, and you either have to sweep them up or do something with them. They're practically falling on your heads around here. So you gather them up, and then, I don't have my little cracker here. Well, I guess I'm not going to get it right now, but basically the first step is to crack the acorn. So you can keep these, you gather them in the fall. You want to make sure they're dry. and then you store them, and they can keep up to 7 years, the black oaks. So it's really your food security for a long period of time around here. And what I would do is take this, and then if you have, you can either crack it with a hammer on the top on the flat surface. See how it has a flat surface on the top? That's the part that you crack. So you hit it with a hammer, you hit it with the rock, it cracks right open. Step 2, so then you've got their cracked acorns, right? So these are all kind of cracked acorns, and you separate out the shells. I put it into a blender with some water, and then that flour that you see at the bottom is the acorn meal. And then I'm recreating, I've got a few different ways to do this in my book, but I find that this is the easiest one for me, which is I just have the flour in here. I fill the mason jar with water, and then every day I pour off the water and add fresh water. It takes about, depending on the species of oak, it can take about 4 or 5 days. And then you taste it, and there should be no bitter taste to it at all. At that point, you can dry it and use it as a flour, mix it in as a flour substitute, kind of like you would with almond flour. So it's a very dense, nutrient-rich flour. So anyway, and a lot of the nutritional value in the oak nut is really in the fatty acids. So it's got essential fatty acids, high content, 15% in one of the tests that I ran on the oak nut flour. So it's definitely something to consider as far as the abundance, the sheer abundance of oak nuts all over our area. And each one tastes differently. So if you taste a blue oak, the nut flour from a blue oak versus a black oak versus a live oak versus a valley oak, they all have their own unique flavors. And maybe we'll celebrate the end of this pandemic by having a oak nut flour tasting party, because that's a really fun thing to do, is try different flavors of these wild foods. So going on to winter, actually, you know what? I'm going back to fall. So it's very hard to pick a favorite wild food for each season. So I'm doing my best to select a favorite. So, but this is also, these are pine nuts. So I don't know if everybody can see the pine nuts. The reason that they don't look white like the pine nuts you see in the store is that these still have this hard shell on them. And you can just crack that by, again, just, placing it between 2 rocks and just gently tapping it, and it pops open. So around here, we have this from the gray pine, these giant pine cones. So that's where these come from. That's the one that's in the most abundance around here. Most of the pine nuts that you buy at the store are from China. So, but in California, we have 3 different types of pine nuts that are native to California that are edible and wonderful. So that's another fall crop to consider adding to your diet. Going on to winter. So I wish I could ask everybody if they know what this is. This is very fragrant, and it likes to be near the water, and it's a California bay. I use this as a seasoning. So just like you would the Mediterranean bay and add it to a soup, you use the California bay in the same way. You don't need as much. So it's very fragrant and pungent. So I use about half of what I would use for the Mediterranean bay as a flavoring. It's also flavoring for ice cream. So in my book, I have a recipe, California bay ice cream, and I collaborated with Treats in town. And we came up with this California bay ice cream recipe, and they're actually going to have it next week at Treats. If anyone wants to go in there and taste it, they're going to have it available for tasting. It's also good for headaches. So you just take a leaf And if you've got a headache, you can actually just rub it on your skin, on your temples, and it helps relieve head pain. Around the house, one of the most common ways I use this plant is actually as a household cleaner and disinfectant. So once again, the main skill you have to have in using these native plants is being able to boil water. So if everybody can boil water, then you basically are on your way towards making all the things in my book. And I try to make it as simple as possible. Basically with this, to make this into a household cleaner, you would put these leaves into a mason jar. Again, cover it with boiling water and leave it overnight. Strain it into an empty spray bottle of some kind of cleaner that you bought at the store. And I guarantee you this is going to be a lot more effective. It keeps bugs away, and it's just really easy to make yourself. You can add a little vinegar to it as like a preservative, and you're all set for a clean house. Another one for the winter is Toyon, and most of the berries have come off of this, so you can't really see. It's the one that gets the red berries at Christmas time. It's got this serrated leaf on it, and kind of looks like that. And so with Toyon, you can also make a cider out of it. I always dry the Toyon berries before making the cider. They're definitely not as sweet as the Manzanita, but they do make a good cider. You can also dry the berries and then grind that up into a spice. And it's really good, like if you like to have fish and you bread it with the Toyon berry spice, it's really tasty. So going back to spring, you saw in the video the green fir tip. So it turns almost like this fluorescent green, the tips of the fir, and you just gently pull and they come right off. And start keeping an eye out anytime in the next, through the next month, the fir tree should start getting the bright green tips. And you can store those by freezing the tips or drying them. And what I like to do most is make that lemonade. So it's basically a vitamin C rich lemonade, or you can make it into sorbet. So once again, I collaborated with Treats, and we came up with this amazing Douglas fir tip sorbet. And they're going to have it in the shop on Earth Day. But it's really easy to make on your own as well. And I do have a recipe for that. It's just, again, to make the lemonade is just about boiling hot water, pour it over the fir tips, let it steep for 5 or 10 minutes, and strain it. So really all of this is very simple, and it's really delicious. I do want to show you one other thing from fir. A friend of mine made this for me, and if you can see that each ring in this necklace is made from the end of the fir tree. So the branch, the very tip, once you've pulled the needles off, it bends. So this doesn't work with other evergreens. I've tried, I thought, well, that's strange. It must work with other ones, but it really only works with Douglas fir. And you can twist these around themselves. So you can see it's not even tied off with anything. It's just twisted around itself, and then formed together to make this necklace. And the mountain Maidu used to make whole skirts out of this Douglas fir. So you can imagine this made into a skirt. So again, if you're bored during the pandemic, you're stuck at home, maybe instead of watching Netflix, it's time to make a Douglas fir skirt. So you might be the only one on your block that it has one, or a necklace, or you can make earrings out of it as well. So Douglas fir is one of my favorites. Again, on spring is miner's lettuce. So I'm not sure if everybody knows what miner's lettuce looks like. I'm gonna bring this closer. It's very distinctive and pretty easy to identify because it has this sort of round shape and the little flower coming out. And this is just so tasty raw. And it was named miner's lettuce. The common name is miner's lettuce just because it was used by the miners. It does have a high vitamin C content, and it was used by the miners to prevent scurvy. So just highly recommend looking around for it and trying to identify it. It just pops up all over the place, and it's also easy to plant. So you can get seeds and plant miner's lettuce around. And these wild greens right now, so it's spring right now, when the wild greens emerge typically before anything comes up in your garden. So, we have a big garden, we grow a lot of, lettuce and other things like that, but really the wild greens are in abundance well before anything else that we could grow in the garden. So so 100 grams of miner's lettuce contains 1/3 of what you need for vitamin C for the day, and it has 22% of the vitamin A you need and 10% of the iron. So it's just in this little abundant native leaf here. I do want to also mention some non-natives are these other spring weeds. So if anyone's out gardening, you're cleaning up your courtyard, your garden, wherever around your house, and you're yanking up weeds, well, those weeds might be something that you want to eat for lunch instead of throw in the compost. So these are chickweed. So I'm going to try to show it. It's looking a little limp right now because it's out of the fridge, but this is very tasty. I make this into pesto. So again, we're a long way away from having any basil, right? It's we're barely into spring, and yet we can be making an amazing chickweed pesto that tastes really good. So I challenge you to find some chickweed and try making it into pesto. You can also use purslane is another common weed that's good, makes a good pesto. Of course, there's nettles, and most of you, if you're not familiar with nettles, you might accidentally become too acquainted with it because it's called stinging nettle for a reason. The thing about stinging nettle, I'll just say briefly, is that it does not sting after you dry it or you blend it or you cook it. So you can just throw it in your stir fry. I wear gloves, throw it in the stir fry, and then all the sting is gone. Blend it in the blender, it's all gone. Dry it and use it as a tea, there's no sting to it. So it's only when it's fresh that you have an issue with that. And of course, there's dandelion, which you can use the leaves and the flowers, and all of these spring greens. These weeds are bitter. And there's a reason, like yarrow, dandelion, all of these are part of spring is detoxing, and bitter flavors help you detox. So another reason to consider trying some of the weeds growing around your garden. So I'm rattling off a lot of information, but just want to say that there's a long history of these plants being used. And there's also scientific studies supporting the uses of these plants. So I really want to encourage you to be curious, step outside and try to form a relationship with the plants that are growing around you. I do start with one plant each season, so it's not overwhelming. Just find one thing that's in abundance around you that you can try and make some recipes with and taste it and get to know it and build from there. And if anyone wants to get my book, you can get it at local bookstores or from the California Native Plant Society. If you want to take a walk with me at some point, we could do that. And really want to also encourage you to plant a native plant in your own backyard. That's a great way to get to know the plant, and they really are a beautiful addition to your landscape. So thank you, and I'll open it up to questions.
Great. Thank you, Alicia. Very interesting. We have a lot of questions here, and just a reminder, everybody, if you have a question you want to ask, just ask it in the chat and we will get to it. Also, if anybody is looking for some stinging nettles, I happen to have a whole garden of them, and there's plenty for everybody. Let's see. We talked about how Manzanita tastes. Abby Jackson Gaines says Manzanita smoothies would be good. Amber Joe wants to know if you know any caterers or local restaurants that feature some of these plants.
Well, in developing the recipes for the book, I worked with a lot of restaurants. Summer Times, which isn't open anymore, they worked with me on the Manzanita Crackers. I know Three Forks occasionally puts nettles on their pizzas. But no, I mean, it's very popular in the Bay Area and other urban areas, where I've sourced plants for restaurants in other urban areas, but surprisingly not that many places locally are featuring them on the menu, except for treats and as ice cream, which is a really great way to eat your native plants.
I specifically am very curious about acorns, because to me, that's the big elephant in the room. According to Charles Mann, California was a acorn orchard, basically, and that the natives maintained giant pastures of acorns. And they're everywhere, we know it, but I've never heard anybody say, oh yeah, acorn is delicious. I've never eaten it myself. I'm kind of dying to try it. Has it ever been served in a fancy California restaurant? Is Alice?
Yeah, definitely. It's very popular. It's actually very popular in Korea as well. It's one of their national dishes is out of acorns. So it's a global thing. In Spain, it's popular. It has been served in restaurants. I make a really good oak nut marzipan. So it's a flower. So if you think, instead of thinking of it sort of as something you're going to bite into, it's more like, how am I going to cook with it? It's been the way that I've used it the most. I've made tortillas out of it that are really delicious. It's very dense. So, you tend to have to mix it with something else. Like you can mix it with manzanita if you want to go with straight natives. You can mix it with masa and make a masa corn tortilla with the oak nut and masa. So there's lots of ways to eat it. By itself, it doesn't have a ton of flavor. It's like saying flour, what flavor is flour, but you can mix things with it, you can flavor it, and it really is delicious. So it's more just, if you think about it as more of a staple.
What about just a bread? What about mixing it with wheat flour and making bread?
Definitely. Yeah, you can definitely do that. I've done that as well. It's an important plant to form a relationship with, because like you said, it's the elephant in the room. I don't think there could be anybody who doesn't have acorns, easily accessible to them. And just getting to know them, understanding, it's just like looking at, in the grocery store, you look at apples and you can identify which ones are not good because there's brown spots and there's, maybe some dents in it. So you wouldn't get those apples. So just with the same thing with oak nuts, like ones that have holes in them, ones that are where the top of the oak nut is not flat and sealed. You can start to get to know a good oak nut, basically. And it's an important thing for let's keep experimenting.
Okay, we got a lot of questions here actually, and we're going to run out of time. How do you get the pine nuts out of the pine cone?
Ooh, that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've tried everything. So as you can see, when it's in this form, it's pretty scary unless you're a squirrel. So yeah, what I found is that if you set it next to any kind of heat source, like next to your fireplace, wood stove, heater, these start to open up. And as they open up, then you can shake it and get you can get these to fall out, right? So these are all just right inside those, but you can't see them if it's totally closed up. But once it starts to open, honestly, I just have my son fling them onto concrete, onto our driveway, and all of these come pouring out. So it's just really about getting these open. And if it's totally closed up, they will open if they're near heat source.
How are the nuts on the ponderosa pines?
It's not like this. It's not pine nut that you'd be eating like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Melissa wants to know if it's okay to eat miner's lettuce after it's flowered.
Yeah, it's fine. It's, whether it's flowering or not, I mean, the flowers are kind of a nice addition to your salad anyway. So yeah, whether it's flowering or pre-flowering, it's still good to enjoy.
Abby Jackson Gain points out that dry roasted ground dandelion root is a good coffee substitute.
Yeah, dandelion is an incredible plant in a lot of different ways, including the root and its uses as a medicine. It's good for the kidneys, flushing out the liver. So there's lots and lots of uses. And the mistake that I think people make is that plants haven't been studied scientifically, or all of this is just sort of hearsay or people just experimenting. But many, many countries around the world have a long, very strict traditions of using these plants for food and for medicine, and then studying them in double-blind placebo-controlled studies. So it's not just something, it has both the beauty of being a native plant in abundance here that's been used for thousands of years, and also to have science behind it in many cases. So it's neat when those things intersect.
Yeah. Roger wants to know, are any of these deer proof?
Yes. The reason the deer want to come eat everything in our gardens is because they're juicy and they're different and they're exciting. They're not as excited about munching down these native plants. So yeah, the best deer-proof plants are the native plants, the plant around your landscaping. And I try to focus on ones that are both beautiful and edible.
And Hindi points out that native plants are also good to attract birds and pollinators.
Yeah, and drought tolerant in most cases. So, I mean, when we're all trying to use less water in our landscaping and be more sensitive to things like that, so you're helping the wildlife. You can have something to snack on seasonally and not use a lot of water, and be safe from deer.
Abby points out that acorn pancakes are good and that Alone Cafe in Berkeley is an indigenous cafe serving indigenous Bay Area food. Have you heard of that
Great.
place?
No, I haven't been there.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're out of time. So thank you very much, Alicia. Very interesting as always.
Yeah, and thank you for doing this, and for the center for keeping our community engaged and pulling us all together so we can look forward to getting together in person.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you all for being here. I will see you next weekend.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Thank you.